The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when Luther Bradford laughed, tossing a black American Express card onto the marble table like it was a piece of trash. He thought he was cutting loose a dead weight, a simple housewife who didn't understand the complexities of his billion-dollar tech empire. He thought he had won. But Luther didn't know the woman sitting across from him wasn't just Everly, the quiet girl he married out of college. She was the sole heir to the Sinclair banking dynasty, a fortune that could buy his entire company 3 times over before breakfast. And by signing those papers, he hadn't just ended a marriage, he had just declared war on the most powerful woman in New York. The penthouse apartment on the 45th floor of the Sovereign Building in Manhattan was cold. It wasn't a matter of temperature. The climate control was set to a precise 72 degrees. But the atmosphere was frigid, stripped of warmth. Much like the marriage that was ending within its walls. Everly sat on the edge of the beige Roche-Beaubois sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple grey cardigan and jeans, a stark contrast to the chrome and glass surroundings that her husband, Luther Bradford, insisted upon. Luther stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city lights, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. He didn't offer her one. "It's done, then?" Luther asked, not turning around. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man used to commanding boardrooms and charming investors. "If you want it to be," Everly said softly. Luther turned then, a sneer tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was undeniably handsome, with sharp features and the kind of aggressive confidence that had landed him on the cover of Forbes as a 30 under 30 visionary. But tonight, his face was twisted with impatience. "Don't start with the martyr act, Everly. It's exhausting," he snapped, walking over to the coffee table where the thick stack of legal documents lay. "My legal team has been generous. You get the condo in Jersey, the 2021 Audi, and a monthly stipend for 2 years. It's more than you deserve. Considering you've contributed absolutely zero to Bradford Dynamics." Everly looked at the papers. "I cooked your meals. Luther, I ironed your shirts before you could afford dry cleaning. I proofread your pitch decks when you were too tired to see straight. Domestic tasks," he waved a hand dismissively. "I can hire a maid for $40 an hour to do that. I need a partner. Everly. A power player. We're about to merge with Zephyr Corp. Do you know what that means? It means galas with senators, dinners with the heads of Goldman Sachs. I can't have you sitting there talking about whatever it is you talk about. Gardening library books." He took a sip of scotch, pacing now. "Look at Sophia. She's the VP of marketing at Zephyr. She speaks 3 languages. She knows the market. She fits the brand." Everly's expression didn't change, though a sharp pain pricked at her chest. "Sophia. So she is the reason for the rush." "She's a catalyst," Luther corrected, though his cheeks flushed slightly. "She made me realize what I was missing. Ambition. Fire. You, Everly, you're just beige. You're comfortable. But I'm not looking for comfort anymore. I'm looking for legacy." He dropped a pen onto the documents. "Sign it. Please. Don't make me drag this out in court. You can't afford a lawyer who can go toe-to-toe with mine, and we both know it." Everly reached for the pen. The weight of it felt familiar. It was a Mont Blanc he had bought for himself to celebrate his first $1,000,000. She remembered the night he bought it. They had eaten take-out pizza on the floor because they had blown the budget on the pen and a bottle of champagne. He had told her then, "We did it, babe." Now, it was, I need a legacy. You're sure about this? Luther, she asked, looking him in the eye. Once I sign this, there is no going back. You are waiving all rights to any assets I might possess, and I am waiving mine to yours. A clean break. Luther laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Assets you possess, Everly. Your bank account has $3,000 in it. My company is valued at $900 million. Yes, I am very sure I want a clean break. I'm trying to protect my future from your mediocrity. Everly uncapped the pen. She didn't shake. She didn't cry. She simply wrote her name in clear, elegant cursive. Everly Marie Bradford. There, she said. Closing the folder, Luther snatched the papers up immediately, checking the signature as if he expected her to have tricked him. Satisfied, his demeanor instantly shifted from hostility to dismissive arrogance. He pulled his wallet out and tossed a black card onto the table. Use that for the movers. Get your things out by Friday. I'm having the place redecorated next week. Sophia hates beige. He walked to the door, grabbing his coat. I'm staying at the Pierre tonight. Don't wait up. The door clicked shut, leaving Everly alone in the silence for a long minute. She sat there. Then, slowly, she stood up and walked to the window where Luther had stood. She looked down at the streets of Manhattan, the city that chewed people up and spit them out. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 11 Luther constantly mocked her for having. It was a secure, encrypted device with no logo on the back. She dialed a number. It rang once. Mrs. Bradford, a deep, gravelly voice, answered. It's Ms. Sinclair, Everly corrected, her voice dropping the soft, submissive timbre she had used for 5 years. It was now cold, authoritative, and sharp as a diamond cutter. He signed. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of typing. Understood. Ms. Sinclair. The clean break clause is active. He has officially waived spousal support and any claim to the Sinclair Trust assets in perpetuity. Good, Everly said. Initiate Phase 2. I want the board of Bradford Dynamics audited. And tell grandfather I'm coming home. We have a merger to kill. The Zephyr merger. No, Everly said. Watching a black limousine pull up to the curb far below, presumably to whisk Luther away to his mistress. The Zephyr deal is small potatoes. I'm talking about the acquisition of the building we're standing in, and cancel the lease on the penthouse. Luther thinks he owns this apartment, but he seems to have forgotten that the Sovereign building is owned by H Group. Which is you? Mum. Which is me? Evict him. Tonight? Everly hung up the phone. She walked back to the table, picked up the black American Express card Luther had thrown at her, and dropped it into the trash can. She didn't need his credit. She owned the bank that issued the card. She went to the bedroom, but she didn't pack. She didn't need the clothes Luther had bought her, the sensible, modest outfits he insisted she wear to look respectable, but not distracting. She opened the back of the closet, where a small, locked safe sat hidden behind a row of winter coats. She keyed in the code. Inside was a single passport, a platinum signet ring bearing a crest of a hawk holding a key, and a checkbook. She took the ring and slid it onto her right hand. It was heavy. The weight of the Sinclair name always was. 5 years ago, Everly had walked away from her family. She had been the rebellious heiress, tired of the bodyguards, the fake friends, the endless scrutiny of high society. She wanted to be loved for herself, not her billions. She had met Luther in a coffee shop, a struggling student with big dreams, and she fell for his hunger. She changed her name, hid her background, and supported him from the shadows, using shell companies to anonymously fund his first startup, so his ego wouldn't be bruised. She had played the role of the supportive, simple wife perfectly. She thought they were building a life together. But Luther didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop. And when the prop stopped shining, he threw it away. You want a legacy. Luther, she thought, walking out of the bedroom. I'll give you a legacy. I'll make sure you're remembered as the man who divorced the Sinclair fortune. The elevator chime dinged. Everly expected the movers. But when the doors opened, a man in a bespoke navy suit stepped out. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him stood two large men who were clearly not movers. Ms. Sinclair, the older man said, bowing his head slightly. I'm Arthur Sterling, head of security for the chairman. Your grandfather sent us. Sterling. Everly nodded. You made good time. The chairman is eager to see you, and... Arthur glanced around the apartment with a look of distaste. He instructed us to ensure the premises are vacated immediately. Luther is gone, Everly said. We know. We have eyes on him at the Pierre. He is currently celebrating with a Miss Delacroix. Everly's jaw tightened. Of course he is. Shall we handle his belongings? Mum. Everly looked around the apartment one last time. She looked at the wedding photos on the mantel, Luther smiling his winning smile, her looking adoringly at him. Lies. All of it. Burn it, Everly said coldly. Burn it all, except the papers. Frame those. She stepped into the elevator, Arthur flanking her, as the doors closed on her life as Everly Bradford. She checked her reflection in the mirrored wall. The sad, beige housewife was gone. The Wolf of Wall Street's only granddaughter was back, and she was hungry. The drive to the Sinclair estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, took 45 minutes, though it felt like traveling back a century. The limousine wound its way up a private drive lined with ancient oaks, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers guarding the secrets of the ultra-wealthy. Everly watched the familiar landscape roll by. For 5 years, she had lived in a cramped, modern apartment, worrying about electricity bills and the price of organic kale. Now, she was returning to a world where budget was a verb used for other people, not a noun that applied to her. The main house loomed out of the darkness, a sprawling Georgian manor of red brick and white stone, lit up like a fortress. It was known simply as Highgard. Arthur Desmond, formerly known as Sterling to the outside world. But Desmond to the inner circle opened the car door. Welcome home, Miss Sinclair. Everly stepped out. The air here smelled different, crisp, clean, and smelling faintly of old money and manicured boxwoods. The massive oak front doors swung open before she even reached the steps. Inside, the foyer was a cavern of marble and gold leaf. Standing at the foot of the grand staircase was a man in a wheelchair, flanked by 2 nurses. He was frail, his skin like parchment paper, but his eyes were sharp. Blue steel, the exact shade of Everly's. Archibald Sinclair, the chairman, the man who had terrified Wall Street for 60 years. So, Archibald rasped, his voice echoing in the vast hall. The prodigal granddaughter returns. Everly walked toward him, her heels clicking rhythmically on the checkerboard floor. She didn't kneel, and she didn't hug him. She stopped 3 feet away. "Hello, grandfather." Archibald studied her, looking for the weakness he had despised 5 years ago, the romanticism, the softness. He didn't find it. He saw the set of her jaw, the cold fire in her eyes. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "You look terrible," he said. "That cardigan is an insult to this house." "It's going in the trash," Everly said, "along with the last 5 years." He signed the papers. He did, without reading the addendums. Archibald let out a dry cackle. "Arrogance is a poor substitute for intelligence. I told you that boy was a climber. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a stepping stone. And when he thought he reached the top, he tried to kick the stone away." "I know," Everly said, her voice dropping. "You were right. I was naive." "You were in love." Archibald spat the word like a curse. "Love makes you stupid. Hate makes you sharp. Are you sharp?" "Ophelos tortias." Everly looked at the portrait of her parents, hanging above the fireplace, killed in a plane crash when she was 10, leaving her with nothing but a fortune and a grandfather who believed affection was a liability. "I want to destroy him. Grandfather, not just his company. I want to break his ego. I want him to know exactly what he threw away." Archibald nodded slowly. "Good. Then let's get to work. The board meeting is at 8 a.m. tomorrow. You need a wardrobe, a haircut, and a briefing on the Zephyr merger. My analysts have found some irregularities in Bradford Dynamics financials. Small cracks, but if you hit a crack hard enough, it shatters," Everly finished. "Go upstairs. Your old room is ready. And Everly—" She paused at the foot of the stairs. "Don't cry over him. Tears rust the machinery." Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the reality of Luther Bradford's clean break was hitting a snag. Luther stood in the lobby of the Sovereign building, his face flushed with a mix of alcohol and rage. His arm was around Sophia Delacroix, a stunning woman in a red silk dress that clung to her curves like a second skin. She checked her watch, looking bored. "Luther, baby, just call the concierge." Sophia purred, running a hand through her perfectly blown-out blonde hair. "Your keycard is probably demagnetized. I did call the concierge," Luther snapped, slamming his hand against the reception desk. "They said the unit is sealed. Sealed I own the damn penthouse." The night manager, a young man named Kevin, who had always been terrified of Luther, stood behind the desk with a strange, polite smile. "I'm sorry. Mr. Bradford," Kevin said. "But the system shows you are no longer a resident. The lease was terminated effective 9 p.m. tonight." "Lease?" Luther laughed incredulously. "I don't have a lease. I bought that apartment 2 years ago." "Actually, sir," Kevin tapped his screen, "the deed to the penthouse is held by a holding company, H Group Real Estate. You were listed as a permitted occupant under a spousal vibrancy clause. Since the divorce papers were filed and digitally notarized this evening, the primary owner, Miss Sinclair, revoked your access." Luther froze. "Who is Miss Sinclair?" "The owner of the building, sir." Sophia frowned, stepping closer. "Luther, what is he talking about? You told me you owned the place outright. You said you paid cash." Luther's mind raced. He had paid cash, or rather, he had thought he did. Everly had handled the paperwork. She had said she had a friend in real estate who could get them a tax break if they bought it through a trust. He had been so busy with the Series B funding round that he just signed where she pointed. Everly. "It's a mistake," Luther muttered. the alcohol buzzing unpleasantly in his head now. My ex? She's trying to be petty. She probably knows the landlord or something. Luther. My Louboutins are inside, Sophia complained. And my laptop. We'll get them tomorrow, Luther said, grabbing her arm a little too roughly. We're going to the Pierre. Screw this place. I'll buy a better one next week. A penthouse in Tribeca. Bigger. Better view. He dragged Sophia toward the exit, but the seed of doubt had been planted. HO Group. He had seen that logo before. It was on the bank statements for the household account. It was on the checks Everly used to pay the utility bills. He pulled out his phone as they waited for the valet. He had a notification from his bank. Alert joint account ending in 4590 has been closed. Balance transfer $0. He swiped it away. That was just the household money. Small change. He opened his main investment portfolio app. Access denied. Account frozen pending audit. His stomach dropped. Luther, Sophia asked, her voice sharpening. Is everything okay? Fine, he lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just bank security protocols. Moving large assets around for the divorce triggers flags. It'll be cleared by morning. But as he looked out at the city, the cold wind biting at his face, he realized he wasn't just cold. He was shivering, and for the first time in years, Luther Bradford felt a flicker of fear. The next morning, Everly Sinclair ceased to exist. In her place stood Eleanor Sinclair, the chairwoman of the Sinclair Group. A team of stylists had descended on high guard at dawn. The mousy brown hair that Everly had kept in a messy bun was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob and dyed a rich, glossy chestnut. The comfortable jeans were replaced by a tailored Armani power suit in charcoal grey, paired with 4-inch stilettos that could double as weapons. She walked into the boardroom of the Sinclair Group headquarters on Wall Street at 8:00 a.m. sharp. The room was filled with 20 men in suits, the board of directors. They were old, cynical, and powerful. They had been managing the empire while Archibald was ill, and they viewed his granddaughter as a socialite, a liability. She threw a folder onto the mahogany table. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone, "you've been comfortable, you've been conservative, and while you've been protecting the principle, the tech sector has been eating our lunch." A heavy-set man named Thomas Thorne leaned back, crossing his arms. "Ms. Sinclair, with all due respect, you've been away, domesticated. The market has changed." "I haven't been away." "Thomas," Everly said, locking eyes with him. "I've been undercover. I've spent the last 5 years living inside the startup ecosystem. I know how they think. I know how they spend. And I know exactly which ones are built on sand." She tapped the screen at the head of the table. A graph appeared. It showed the stock price of Bradford Dynamics. It was soaring. "Bradford Dynamics," Everly said. "Currently valued at $900 million, slated to merge with Zephyr Corp in 2 weeks. Everyone says it's the next unicorn." "It's a solid investment," another board member chimed in. "We hold a 4% stake in their debt." "Sell it," Everly said. The room erupted in murmurs. "Sell it's rallying. The merger will double the value." "The merger is a farce," Everly stated calmly. "Bradford Dynamics has a burn rate of 3 million a month. Their revolutionary AI algorithm is barely functional. It's being propped up by cheap manual labor in offshore server farms. I know, because I used to balance their books on Sunday nights." Silence fell over the room. "I know where the bodies are buried," Everly continued. Luther Bradford is leveraging his personal assets to float the company until the Zephyr buyout. If that buyout fails, he defaults. If he defaults, the stock crashes. And why would the buyout fail? Thorne asked, intrigued despite himself. Everly smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Because we're going to buy Zephyr Corp first. Hostile takeover. Archibald spoke from his wheelchair at the head of the table. He looked delighted. Aggressive acquisition, Everly corrected. Zephyr is public. Their CEO, Marcus Cole, is greedy. If we offer him 20% above market value, he'll sell his own mother. We buy Zephyr. We kill the merger with Bradford. Luther's stock tanks. We short the stock on the way down. We make $1 billion. And we destroy a fraud. She looked around the room. Motion to authorize a tender offer for Zephyr Corp. Do I have a second? Archibald raised a trembling hand. Seconded. One by one, the hands went up. The men looked at her with new respect. She wasn't a socialite. She was a shark. 3 days later, the social event of the season arrived, the Aurora Ball. It was a charity gala held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, benefiting ocean conservation. Tickets were $50,000 a plate. It was the place to see and be seen. Luther Bradford was desperate. The last 72 hours had been a nightmare. His credit cards were still frozen. His access to the penthouse was still blocked. He was staying at a hotel, paying with a company card that he knew he shouldn't be using for personal expenses. Worse, rumors were swirling. Zephyr Corp had gone silent. His calls to Sophia were getting shorter. She seemed distracted. He needed investors. He needed to close this deal. The Aurora Ball was his hunting ground. He had spent his last liquid cash on a table, hoping to woo the CEO of a Japanese venture fund. He arrived with Sophia on his arm. She looked radiant, scanning the room for photographers. Luther looked tired, though he hid it well under a layer of expensive foundation and a forced grin. "Relax, Luther," Sophia whispered as they walked up the red carpet. "You're gripping my arm like a vice." "I need to find Marcus Cole," Luther muttered. "The Zephyr CEO. He's supposed to be here. I need to know why his legal team hasn't sent the final contracts." They entered the Great Hall, transformed into an underwater fantasy with blue lights and suspended jellyfish sculptures. The elite of New York were their actors, politicians, tycoons. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. The music lowered, the chatter stopped. At the top of the grand staircase, a woman appeared. She was wearing a dress that seemed to be made of liquid, midnight, a deep, shimmering blue velvet that hugged her figure and pooled on the stairs behind her. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat, vintage Cartier pieces that were worth more than the entire building Luther lived in. But it wasn't the dress. It was the woman. She descended the stairs with the grace of a queen. The photographers went into a frenzy, flashes popping like strobe lights. "Who is that?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with jealousy. Luther squinted. The woman looked familiar. The curve of her jaw, the way she held her head, but the confidence, the sheer, radiating power that was alien. The woman reached the bottom of the stairs. A crowd of admirers instantly surrounded her. Luther pushed forward, driven by a bizarre instinct. He got closer. He heard her laugh, a low, melodic sound he had heard 1,000 times over cheap wine in their old apartment. His heart stopped. "Everly," he whispered. Sophia looked at him. "What, that's not your ex-wife? You said she was a frump. That woman is—" That woman is Eleanor Sinclair." "Who?" Luther asked, his voice cracking. "Eleanor Sinclair, the banking heiress. She's been in Europe for years. Rumors said she was sick or something. She's the richest woman in this room. Luther." Luther shook his head. "No, that's Everly. My Everly." He shoved past a waiter, ignoring Sophia's protest. He marched right up to the circle of people surrounding her. "Everly!" he barked. The conversation died. The circle parted. Everly turned slowly. She held a glass of champagne. She looked at him with an expression of polite confusion. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cool and detached. "Do I know you?" Luther froze. "Stop playing games. What are you doing here? How did you get in? And where did you get those diamonds? Did you steal them?" A gasp went through the crowd. A heavy-set man, Thomas Thorne, stepped forward, blocking Luther. "Sir, you are speaking to the chairwoman of the Sinclair Group. I suggest you lower your voice." "Chairwoman." Luther laughed, a manic edge to it. "She's a housewife. She irons shirts, Everly. Tell them you're my wife." Everly took a sip of champagne. She looked at Luther like one might look at a misbehaving dog. "Ex-wife," she corrected calmly. "And I believe the name on the divorce papers was Everly Bradford. That person no longer exists. You made sure of that, didn't you? Luther. You wanted a clean break." She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You wanted someone with ambition, someone with a legacy. Well, here I am. I own the bank that holds your mortgage. I own the building you sleep in. And as of this afternoon—" She paused, letting a cruel smile play on her lips. "I own Zephyr Corp." Luther's face went pale. "What? I bought it," she said, loud enough for the press to hear. "Sinclair Group acquired a controlling interest in Zephyr Corp at 4:00 p.m. today. We're cancelling the merger with Bradford Dynamics. We feel the technology is derivative." The cameras were flashing blindingly now, capturing the moment Luther Bradford's world shattered. You can't," he stammered. "The deal, it was done." "It's never done until the ink is dry," Everly said, echoing his words from the night of the divorce. "Enjoy the party. Luther, I hear the shrimp is excellent. It should be. I paid for it." She turned her back on him. Security. Arthur Desmond materialized from the shadows. "Ms. Sinclair." "Mr. Bradford is distressing the guests. Please escort him out." "Wait," Luther shouted as Arthur grabbed his arm. He looked frantically for Sophia. Sophia was standing 10 feet away. She looked at Luther, then at Everly. She saw the power dynamic shift in real time. She saw the sinking ship. She turned around and walked toward the bar, ignoring Luther's cries. As Luther was dragged toward the exit, kicking and shouting, Everly didn't look back. She turned to the Japanese investor Luther had been trying to meet. "Mr. Tanaka," she said in fluent Japanese, "I apologize for the disturbance. Shall we discuss that solar initiative now?" The morning after the Aurora Ball. The sun rose over a Manhattan that looked exactly the same. Yet for Luther Bradford, the city had fundamentally changed. It was no longer his playground. It was a cage. He sat in his corner office at Bradford Dynamics. The view of the Hudson River, usually a source of inspiration. Today, it felt like a mocking reminder of the empire he was losing. His phone had been ringing non-stop since 6 a.m. Investors, journalists, panicked board members, everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. Was the Zephyr merger dead? Was the company solvent? Luther, his assistant. A young woman named Sarah buzzed in. Her voice was shaky. Mr. Mason Cole is on line 1. He says it's urgent. Luther grabbed the receiver, his knuckles white. Mason, tell me it's a lie. Tell me she didn't buy you out. It's not a lie. Luther. Mason Cole's voice was devoid of the camaraderie they had shared over golf just last week. H Group put in a tender offer at 4:00 p.m. yesterday. Cash. 40% above market value. My board accepted unanimously this morning. The paperwork is already filed with the SEC. You traitor, Luther shouted, standing up and kicking his chair back. We had a handshake deal. We were going to revolutionize the industry. Luther, wake up, Mason snapped. Business is business. You have a burn rate of $3 million a month and a prototype that crashes every 4 hours. Everly Sinclair has... well, she has the GDP of a small country. She offered to keep me on as a consultant. You offered me stock options in a company that's currently tanking. I'll sue, Luther hissed. I'll sue you for breach of contract. I'll sue her for tortious interference. Read the contract, Luther. The exclusivity period expired yesterday at noon. You were too busy trying to get a table at the gala to renew it. You dropped the ball. Good luck. The line went dead. Luther slammed the phone down so hard the plastic casing cracked. He looked at the live ticker on his wall screen. MDYN minus 18%. It was a bloodbath. The door to his office opened without a knock. It wasn't Sarah. It was Sophia. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a box. She didn't look at him. She walked straight to her desk. She had a small office adjacent to his, as the VP of Strategy, and started dumping items into the box. What are you doing? Luther asked, walking over to her. Sophia, don't tell me you're leaving too. We can fix this. I just need to find a new partner. Maybe Stark Industries or Stop, Sophia said, holding up a hand. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, but her expression was cold. It's over. Luther, I just got off the phone with a headhunter. H Group is hiring. They're looking for a new VP of marketing for their tech division. Luther stared at her, betrayed. You're going to work for her after what she did to me. She didn't do anything to you, Luther, Sophia said, tossing a framed photo of them into the trash. She beat you, fair and square, and honestly, it was impressive. You told me she was a bore. You told me she was beige. You didn't tell me she was the most powerful woman in New York. She tricked me. No, Sophia corrected, walking to the door. You underestimated her. There's a difference, and I'm not going down with this ship. Goodbye, Luther. She walked out, leaving the door open, the sounds of the office panic, shouting, phones ringing flooded in. Luther sank onto the floor. He was alone, but desperation breeds creativity. As he sat there, watching his stock price tick down another 2%, a thought occurred to him. Everly had money. She had power. But she had a secret. She had spent 5 years living as a nobody. 5 years lying to the world. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had saved years ago, a fixer named Jack Vane. Jack was a bottom feeder, a private investigator who specialized in dirty laundry for tabloids. Jack, Luther said, his voice low. It's Bradford. I have a story for you. Exclusive rights. But I want full control of the narrative. I'm listening, Jack's raspy voice answered. The new Queen of Wall Street, the Sinclair heiress. She's a fraud. She spent 5 years playing house with me, deceiving the public, hiding assets. I want to paint a picture. Jack. I want the world to see her not as a powerful CEO, but as a mentally unstable liar who trapped a young entrepreneur in a web of deceit. That's a dangerous game. Mr. Bradford, Jack chuckled. She has lawyers who eat guys like me for lunch. I don't care, Luther said, his eyes hard. She wants a war. I'll give her a war. But we're not fighting in the boardroom. We're fighting in the mud. The article dropped on Sunday morning. It was the cover story of the New York Chronicle, a sensationalist paper that loved a scandal. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The billion-dollar lie how Everly Sinclair played God with a husband's heart." The story was a masterpiece of manipulation. It painted Luther as a hard-working, self-made man who had fallen in love with a simple, sweet girl named Everly. It claimed he had no idea of her wealth, and that she had perversely hid her identity to test him. Treating their marriage like a twisted social experiment, it implied she was mentally unstable, suffering from a God complex, and that she had discarded him the moment he achieved success, because she couldn't stand him being anything other than her toy. It even included a photo of them from 3 years ago, Luther looking tired and working at a kitchen table, with Everly standing behind him, looking shadowy and vaguely menacing thanks to some subtle photo editing. In the penthouse office of Highgard, Everly read the paper while eating a grapefruit. Arthur Desmond stood by the window, his face grim. "The board is not happy. Ma'am, Thomas Drake has been calling all morning. He says the stock dropped 3 points on the opening bell. Character concerns." "Let them call," Everly said, turning the page. "It's a good piece of fiction. Luther missed his calling. He should have been a screenwriter. He's playing the victim card very well." Desmond noted. "Social media is trending with hashtag Justice for Luther. People don't like being tricked. They see his point that hiding a billion-dollar fortune from your spouse is dishonest." Everly set the paper down. "It was dishonest, Arthur. That's the problem. The best lies always have a kernel of truth. I did hide it. I did test him. Because you wanted to be loved for yourself. And look how that turned out," she said dryly. "But Luther has made a tactical error. He assumes that because I hid my money, I also hid my records." She stood up, walking to a wall, safe hidden behind a painting of a storm-tossed ship. She spun the dial and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "He thinks this is a he-said-she-said battle. He thinks he can sway public opinion and force me to settle, maybe give him back his company, or a payout to make the bad press go away." She tossed the ledger to Desmond. "What is this?" he asked. "The beige ledger," Everly said. "Luther called me beige, boring. But while I was being boring, I was also being his CFO. Every time he used company funds to pay for a dinner with Sophia, I wrote it down. Every time he falsified a quarterly report to secure a loan, I kept the original. Every time he bribed a safety inspector to overlook the wiring in his server farms, I have the recording." Desmond opened the book. His eyes widened. "This is extensive. This is federal prison time." "I was protecting him," Everly said softly, looking out at the gardens. "I was his wife. I cleaned up his messes because I thought he was just under pressure. I thought he would grow out of it. But he didn't." She turned back to Desmond, her eyes hardening. "He wants to play in the mud fine, but I don't get dirty. I bury people. What are your orders? Call a press conference, not a statement, a live interview. Tonight, prime time. And get the SEC on the phone. Tell them I have a whistleblower file I'd like to submit regarding Bradford Dynamics. And Luther, invite him." Everly smiled coldly. "Send a car. Tell him I'm ready to negotiate a surrender." The studio of the Bradford Hour was freezing. It was the most watched news program in the country, and tonight the ratings were expected to break records. Luther sat in the green room, looking nervous but triumphant. His suit was new, bought on credit he didn't have, and his hair was perfectly coiffed. Jack Vane sat next to him. "You got her," Jack said, chewing on a toothpick. "She wants to negotiate on live TV. That means she's scared. She's going to offer you a settlement to kill the story. Take the money. Luther, don't be greedy." "I want my company back," Luther said, staring at his reflection. "And I want an apology." A production assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Bradford, you're on in 2 minutes. Miss Sinclair is already seated." Luther walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The audience applauded politely. Everly sat in a white armchair opposite the host. David Bradford. She wore a crimson suit the color of blood and power. She looked relaxed, her legs crossed, a small smile on her face. Luther sat down, trying to match her composure. "Welcome back," David Bradford said to the camera. "We are joined by Luther Bradford and Everly Sinclair, a former couple, now locked in one of the most high-profile corporate wars in history." David turned to Luther. "Luther, your allegations in the Chronicle were explosive. You claim you were defrauded." "I was," Luther said, leaning forward, using his earnest CEO voice. "Imagine finding out the person you slept next to for 5 years was a stranger. I built a company from nothing, scraping by, while my wife sat on a dragon's hoard of gold and watched me struggle. It's psychological abuse." The audience murmured in sympathy. David turned to Everly. "Everly, your response." Everly didn't look at David. She looked at Luther. "It's a moving story, Luther," she said calmly. "But you left out a few details. You said you built the company from nothing. But who provided the seed capital for Bradford Dynamics?" "I did," Luther said. "I took out a loan from the Cayman Trust," Everly nodded, "which is a subsidiary of H Group. I approved that loan. Luther, under a pseudonym, because no bank in New York would touch you with your credit score." Luther faltered. That's irrelevant." "Is it?" Everly reached into her bag and pulled out a single piece of paper. "And the struggle you claimed you were scraping by. Yet, here is a credit card statement from 2024. While I was couponing for groceries, you spent $40,000 at Le Bernardin and Percé in 3 months with Sophia Delacroix." The audience gasped. "That was business," Luther shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Client dinners, really?" Everly raised an eyebrow. "Because on this date, February 14th, you listed the expense as client development. But the receipt shows a purchase of a Cartier bracelet. I never received a bracelet." "Luther, did the client..." Luther's mouth opened and closed. He looked at the camera, then at Everly. "This is petty," he spat. "This is about a marriage. This isn't about business." "You made it about business when you brought my company into it," Everly said, her voice turning into steel. "You want to talk about fraud. Let's talk about the Zephyr merger. You valued your company at $900 million based on a proprietary algorithm. But the code, it doesn't exist. Does it?" Luther froze. The blood drained from his face. This was the nuclear option. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I do," Everly said. "I have the logs. I have the emails where you instructed your engineers to fake the demo for the investors. That's not a marital dispute, Luther. That's securities fraud. That's 20 years in federal prison." She placed a thick file on the coffee table between them. The SEC has a copy of this. The district attorney has a copy. And now... She pushed it toward him. You have a copy. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. However, Everly continued, her voice softening just enough to be terrifying, I am a merciful woman. I am willing to ask the DA to delay the investigation. On one condition. What? Luther whispered, his voice broken. You admit, right now, to this camera, that you signed the divorce papers of your own free will. You admit that you left me because you thought I was useless to your ambition, and you publicly resign as CEO of Bradford Dynamics, handing full control to the Sinclair Group. Luther looked at the file. He looked at the audience, who were now looking at him with disgust. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he had walked into a slaughterhouse thinking it was a tea party. Luther choked out. Say it, Everly commanded. I resign, Luther whispered. Louder, Everly said, leaning back. Make sure the back row can hear you. The silence in the studio, after the cameras cut, was heavier than the noise had been. Luther sat frozen, the file of his crimes resting on his knees like a lead weight. The audience, usually eager for autographs, filed out in hushed whispers, casting glances of pity and disgust at the man who had just dismantled his own life on national television. Cut, the director shouted. That's a wrap. David Bradford stood up, unclipped his microphone, and looked at Luther. There was no warmth in his eyes, only the professional detachment of a man who had just secured his next Emmy. Good luck, Mr. Bradford, David said dryly. My producers will see you out the back. The press is enthusiastic out front. Luther stood up, his legs trembling. He looked toward the other chair, but it was empty. Everly was already gone. She hadn't stayed to gloat. She hadn't stayed to twist the knife. She had simply delivered the fatal blow and walked away, indifferent to the wreckage. He stumbled into the green room. Jack Vane was gone. The fixer had seen the tide turn and vanished before the commercial break, likely deleting Luther's number from his phone as he went. Luther walked out the back exit into the cool night air of the alley. A lone black SUV was waiting. He hoped it was Sophia. He needed her. He needed to explain that it was all a setup, that he could still fix this. The window rolled down. It wasn't Sophia. It was a process server. Luther Bradford, the man asked, handing him a thick envelope through the window. You've been served. Breach of fiduciary duty, securities fraud, and a restraining order filed by the board of Bradford Dynamics. The SUV drove off. Luther pulled out his phone. He had 15 missed calls from Sophia. Hope flared in his chest. She was worried. She still cared. He dialed her number. Sophia. Thank God. Look, don't believe what you saw. Everly manipulated the data. Luther, shut up. Sophia's voice was icy, sharper than he had ever heard it. She wasn't crying. She sounded busy. I'm not calling to console you. I'm calling to tell you to stop using my name. What? I just saw the interview, she said. You dragged me into your mess. You mentioned the bracelet. Do you know what the FBI does when they hear about gifts bought with embezzled funds? They seize them. Agents are at my apartment right now. Luther, they're taking the jewelry. They're taking the car. Sophia, I'm sorry. I'm cooperating. She cut him off. I'm giving them everything. The emails, the texts where you bragged about cooking the books. I'm not going to jail for you. I was your VP, but I was never your accomplice. You're on your own. Sophia, please, I have nowhere to go. The hotel locked me out. Try a shelter, she said. Or maybe ask your ex-wife. Oh, wait. You can't. You signed the divorce papers. Goodbye. Luther. The line clicked dead. Luther stood in the alley, the phone slipping from his numb fingers. It clattered onto the wet pavement, the screen shattering. It was a fitting metaphor. He walked aimlessly for hours. He ended up in Central Park, sitting on a bench near the reservoir. The city skyline glittered across the water, billion-dollar buildings filled with billion-dollar dreams. He had been one of them. He had been a king. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the path. The lights flashed. "Park's closed, buddy," the officer said over the loudspeaker. "Move along." Luther looked up. The officer squinted at him. "Hey," the cop said, stepping out of the car. "Ain't you that guy, the one from TV tonight, the one who stole from his wife?" Luther didn't answer. He just lowered his head. "Yeah, that's him," the partner said, laughing. "The billionaire genius. Looks more like a bum now." "I'm not a bum," Luther whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm an innovator." "Sure you are," the officer said, gesturing with his baton. "Go innovate somewhere else. Move." Luther stood up and walked into the darkness. He had no money, no friends, no wife, no company. He reached into his pocket and found the only thing he had left. The gold Mont Blanc pen Everly had bought him when he made his first $1,000,000. The pen he had used to sign the divorce papers. He looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a scream of pure, unadulterated rage, he threw it as hard as he could into the black water of the reservoir. It made a tiny splash, and then it was gone. 1 year later, the skyline of Manhattan had changed again. A new tower now dominated the financial district, the Sinclair Spire. It was a marvel of glass and steel, sustainable, efficient, and breathtakingly beautiful. On the top floor, in an office that felt more like a throne room, Everly Sinclair stood looking out at her city. She looked different. The softness of her youth was gone, replaced by a polished, diamond-hard elegance. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than Luther's first car. Her hair was longer now, styled in loose waves that framed a face the world had come to respect and fear. Mrs. Sinclair. Arthur Desmond stood in the doorway. He hadn't aged a day. If anything, victory had made him look younger. "The delegation from Tokyo is here," he said, "and the acquisition of the Solartech firm is complete. We now control 40% of the renewable energy grid on the East Coast." "Excellent," Everly said, turning from the window. "And the charity initiative? Fully funded, the Everly Grant has already provided scholarships to 50 young female entrepreneurs. We're changing lives." "Mom." "Good," she said. "Legacies aren't built on money, Arthur. They're built on what you leave behind." She walked to her desk, a massive slab of white marble. On it sat a single-framed document. It wasn't a degree or an award. It was the front page of the New York Chronicle from a year ago. "Bradford fraud exposed. Ex-husband pleads guilty." Luther had avoided prison. Barely. His lawyer, a public defender, since he couldn't afford anyone else, had cut a deal. In exchange for surrendering all remaining assets and admitting to federal fraud charges. He was given 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of any public company. He was also ordered to pay restitution, which meant every cent he earned for the next 20 years would go to the investors he swindled. "Have you heard from him?" Arthur asked, noticing her gaze on the frame. "No," Everly said. "And I don't expect to. He's in the past. Arthur, a lesson learned." "There is one small matter," Arthur said, hesitating slightly. A letter arrived from a L. Bradford. It was addressed to Everly. He held out a cheap, white envelope. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of its former arrogant loops. Everly took it. She didn't open it immediately. She ran her thumb over the postmark. It was from Queens. "Burn it," she said, handing it back. Arthur looked surprised. "You don't want to read it. It might be an apology." "I don't need an apology," Everly said, her voice steady. "And I don't need his regret. He made his choice the night he threw that black card on the table. He wanted a clean break. I'm honoring his wish." Arthur nodded, a small smile touching his lips. He took the letter and dropped it into the shredder by the door. The machine whirred, chewing up the last words of Luther Bradford. "The Japanese delegation is waiting," Arthur said. "Let's go," Everly said. She walked out of the office, her heels clicking a rhythm of power and purpose. She didn't look back at the shredder. She didn't look back at the empty space where her husband used to be. Down on the street, far below, a man in a faded windbreaker was sweeping the sidewalk in front of a coffee shop. He paused, leaning on his broom, and looked up at the Sinclair spire piercing the clouds. The sun reflected off the glass, blinding him for a moment. He squinted, shielding his eyes with a rough, calloused hand. "Hey, new guy," the manager shouted from the doorway. "Quit daydreaming and empty the trash. Lunch rush is coming." "Coming," Luther muttered. He took one last look at the tower, at the empire he could have been a part of, at the woman who had loved him when he was nothing. He picked up the trash bag. It was heavy, but this time there was no one to carry it for him. Luther Bradford turned away from the sky and went back to work, just another face in the crowd, while above him the Queen of Wall Street continued her ascent, alone, untouchable, and finally, truly free. And that is the story of how Luther Bradford learned the most expensive lesson of his life: never mistake silence for weakness, and never underestimate the woman standing in your shadow. He wanted a legacy, and he got one. He became the man who fumbled a billion-dollar fortune for the sake of his ego. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new drama. And tell me in the comments below, do you think Everly was too harsh, or did Luther get exactly what he deserved? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.